Hi friends, this is Miss Tara with another edition of Bedtime Stories, Chapter 3 of Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, and Chapter 3 is called The Wildwood. The mole had long wanted to make the acquaintance of Badger. He seemed by all accounts to be such an important personage, and though rarely visible, to make his unseen influence felt by everyone about the place. But whenever the mole mentioned his wish to the water rat, he always found himself put off. "It's all right," the rat would say. "Badger'll turn up some day or other. He's always turning up. And then I'll introduce you. The best of fellows. But you must not only take him as you can find him, and when you can find him." "Couldn't you ask him here? Dinner or something?" said the mole. "He wouldn't come," replied the rat simply. "Badger hates society and invitations and dinner and all that sort of thing." "Well then, supposing we go in and call on him," suggested the mole. "Oh, I'm sure he wouldn't like that at all," said the rat, quite alarmed. "He's so very shy. He'd sure to be offended. I've never even ventured to call on him at his own home myself, though I know him so well. Besides, we can't. It's quite out of the question, because he lives in the very middle of the wildwood." "Well, supposing he does," said the mole. "You told me the wildwood was all right, you know." "Oh, I know. So it is," replied the rat evasively. "But I think we won't go there just now. Not just yet. It's a long way, and he wouldn't be at home at this time of year anyhow. He'll be coming along some day, if you wait quietly." The mole had to be content with this, but the badger never came along, and every day brought its amusements. And it was not till summer was long over, the cold and frost miry was kept them much indoors, and the swollen river paced just outside their windows with a speed that mocked at boating of any sort of kind, that he found his thoughts dwelling again with much persistence on the solitary gray badger who lived his own life by himself in his hole in the middle of the wildwood. In the winter-time the rat slept a great deal, retiring early and rising late. During his short day he sometimes scribbled poetry or did small domestic jobs about the house. And of course there were always animals dropping in for a chat, and consequently there was a good deal of storytelling and comparing notes on the past summer and all of its doings. Such a rich chapter it had been, when one came to look back on it all, with illustrations so numerous and so highly colored. The pageant of the riverbank had marched steadily along, unfolding itself in scene pictures that succeeded each other in stately procession. Purple loosestrife arrived early, shaking luxuriant tangled locks along the edge of the mirror, whence its own face looked back at it. Willow herb, tender and wistful, like a pink sunset cloud, was not slow to follow. Comfrey, the purple hand in hand with the white, crept forth to take its place in the line, and one last morning the diffident and delaying dog-rose stepped delicately on the stage. And one knew, as if string music had announced in stately chords that strayed into a gavotte, that June was at last here. One member of the company was still awaited, the shepherd boy for the nymphs to woo, the knight for whom the ladies waited at the window, the prince that was to kiss the sleeping summer back into life and love. But when meadow-sweet Debonair and odorous and amber jerkin moved graciously to his place in the group, then the play was ready to begin. And what a play it had been! Drowsy animals, snug in their holes while wind and rain were battering at their doors, recalled still keen mornings an hour before sunrise, when the white mist, as yet dispersed, clung closely along the surface of the water. Then the shock of the early plunge, the scamper along the bank, the radiant transformation of earth, air, water, and when suddenly the sun was with them again, and gray was gold, and color was born and sprang out of the earth once more. They recalled the languorous siesta of the hot midday deep in the green undergrowth, the sun striking through the tiny golden shafts and spots, the boating and bathing in the afternoon, the rambles along dusty lanes and through yellow cornfields, the long cool evening at last, when so many threads were gathered up, so many friendships rounded, and so many adventures planned for the morrow. There were plenty of talk about on those short winter days when the animals found themselves round the fire. Still the mole had a good deal of spare time on his hands, and so one afternoon, when the rat was in his armchair before the blaze, was alternately dozing and trying over rhymes that wouldn't fit, he formed the resolution to go out by himself and explore the wildwood, and perhaps strike up an acquaintance with Mr. Badger. It was a cold afternoon and the hard, steely sky overhead, but when he slipped out of the warm parlor into the open air, the country lay bare and entirely leafless around him, and though he had never seen so far and so intimately inside the insides of things as on that winter day, when nature was deep in her annual slumber and seemed to have kicked the clothes off. Corpses, dells, quarries, and hidden places which had been mysterious mines for exploration in leafy summer, now exposed them and their secrets pathetically, and seemed to ask him to overlook their shabby poverty for a while, till they could riot in the rich masquerade as before, and trick and entice with the old deceptions. It was pitiful in a way, and yet cheering, even exhilarating. He was glad he liked the country, undecorated, hard, and stripped of its finery. He had gone down to the bare bones of it, and they were fine and strong and simple. He did not warm the clover and play the seeding grass. Screens of quickset, billowy drapery of beech and elm seemed best. With great cheerfulness of spirit he pushed on toward the wildwood, which lay before him low and threatening, like a black reef in some still southern sea. There was nothing to alarm him at first entry. Twigs crackled under his feet, logs tripped him, funguses on stumps resembled caricatures, and startled him for the moment by their likeness to something familiar and far away. But this was all fun and exciting. It led him on, and penetrated to where the light was less, and trees crouched nearer and nearer, and holes made ugly mouths at him on each side. Everything was very still now. The dusk advanced on him steadily, rapidly gathering in behind and before. The light seemed to be draining away like flood water. Then the faces began. It was over his shoulder and indistinctly that he first thought he saw a face, a little evil wedge-shaped face looking out at him from a hole, and when he turned and confronted it, the thing had vanished. He quickened his pace, telling himself cheerfully not to begin imagining things, or there would simply be no end to it. He passed another hole and another, and then yes, no, yes, certainly a little narrow face with hard eyes had flashed up for an instant from a hole and was gone. He hesitated, braced himself up for the effort, and strode on. Then suddenly, as if it had been so all the time, every hole, far and near, there were hundreds of them that seemed to possess its face, coming and going rapidly, all fixing on him glances of malice and hatred, all hard eyes and evil and sharp. If he could only get away from the holes in the banks, he thought, there would be no more faces. He swung off the path and plunged into the untrodden places of the wood. Then the whistling began. Very faint and shrill it was, and far behind him, when he first heard it, but somehow it made him hurry forward. Then still very faint and shrill, it sounded far behind him, and made him hesitate and want to go back. As he halted in indecision, it broke out on either side, and seemed to be caught up and passed on throughout the whole length of the wood to its furthest limit. There they were, up and alert and ready, evidently whoever they were. He was alone and unarmed, and far from any help. The night was closing in. Then the pattering began. He thought it was only falling leaves at first, so slight and delicate with the sound of it. And then it grew to a regular rhythm, as he knew it for nothing else but the pat, pat, pat of little feet, still a long way off. Or was it in front or behind? It seemed to be the first one, then the other, then both. It grew and multiplied, till from every quarter, as he listened anxiously, leaning this way and that, it seemed to be closing in on him. As he stood still to hearken, a rabbit came running through the woods, through the trees. He waited, expecting it to slacken its pace or to swerve from him to a different course. Instead, the animal almost brushed him as it dashed past, his face set and hard eyes staring. "Get out of this, you fool! Get out!" the mole heard him mutter as he swung round the stump and disappeared down a friendly burrow. The pattering increased till it sounded like a sudden hail of dry leaf carpet spread around him. The whole wood seemed running now, running hard, hunting, chasing, closing in on something or somebody. In a panic, he began to run too. Aimlessly, he knew not whither. He ran up against things and fell over things and into things and darted under things and dodged round things. At last he took refuge in the deep dark hollow of an old beech tree, which offered shelter, concealment, and perhaps even safety, but who could tell? Anyone Anyhow, he was too tired to run any farther, and could only snuggle down in the dry leaves which had drifted into the hollow and hope he was safe for the time. As he lay there panting and trembling, he listened to the whistlings and the patterings outside. He knew it at last in all of its fullness, the dread thing which the other little dwellers in the field and hedgerow had encountered here, and known as their darkest moment. The thing which the rat had vainly tried to shield him from, the terror of the wild wood. All right, friends, that is the last part of Chapter 3, Part A. Stay tuned tomorrow for Chapter 3, Part B. We'll see you tomorrow, but until then, sweet dreams. Good night.